Welcome to the online version of Digital Imaging 2. Oh yeah. Alright, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this video, and I'm just going to run through and kind of explain, a virtual lecture, if you will. So here we go. Alright, so for the next two classes, this is still going to primarily be Photoshop, but for the next two classes, we're going to utilize InDesign, Adobe InDesign. So Adobe InDesign is part of the Adobe Creative Cloud, so if you have the entire Adobe Creative Cloud suite, you will have this available for you. You can just download it and so on and so forth. But basically, as it is written here, is a digital publishing tool for layouts. So typically what that means, what it's really good for are that it's not good for image generation. Like, it's not like Photoshop where you can like take a photo and manipulate it or make an image right inside of it, or even for like vector graphics where you're making logos. What it's more meant to do is layout. So it's very much like for magazines and books, interactive media, ebooks, and things like that. It's particularly good. It's really good with text, and it's really good at doing multi-page layouts. Okay, so like when you see magazines or probably even newspapers, I don't know what newspapers don't really exist anymore. But those sort of things where basically you're laying out your composition. Like you'll say, I want to put a picture over here and text over here and a logo over here, and you're blocking all the stuff out, and then you bring in the information. That's kind of what InDesign does. It's the part that you put everything into. So that's kind of what it was built for, and it's the best at it. I'm not honestly personally a huge fan of the program. I'd rather like make things, but if you are a graphic design person, this is totally going to be right up your alley, because it's all about, setting up the content for the viewer to digest. Okay. So what I'm talking about now is basically page design. So the idea with page design is that these are just some basic principles. So first is proximity. So automatically when things are near each other, you assume association. So if you look at this list, we assume, obviously it's a list of presidents, but you automatically assume they all have association with each other. Now, if you look over here, this first section, right, they're all near each other, and then this is indented. You assume that these here have some sort of association, and these here have some sort of association, because they are near each other. Now, same thing here. If you look at George Washington, good job spelling check by me. But obviously, you assume that this photo is going to be of George Washington, right? You assume this is going to be John Adams, and you assume this is going to be... So you assume that this is going to be about George Washington, and that this text is dealing with it, and this image is dealing with it, because all these items are together. I know it sounds obvious, but that is typically what you're usually trying to do. Most of the time when you're creating your ideas and you're making your designs, the first thing you want to do is just group all of the things that are meant to go together and put them together. It'd be very weird to have like, it says George Washington, and then I talk about McDonald's, and then over here is a picture of like the Wendy's girl, right? That wouldn't make any sense, because none of those things have any association. So that's usually the first thing is proximity, okay? Now, white space. White space is actually probably the most important thing that you could deal with as far as design is concerned. White space is very, very big. If you go to any like web design, you're going to see that, or even graphic designs, there's going to be a lot of area that's empty, okay? If you want to make something stand out, you could do a couple things, right? You could, like, let's say I had a big magazine and there's a bunch of text in it. If I want to make one word stand out, I could make that word bold. That would definitely make it stand out, right? I could make that word larger, most definitely. I could change the color to red, right? That also would work. I could use a picture behind it or something, right? All those things would work. But if you really want to make something stand out, the best way to do that is to give it white space or empty space, okay? Or negative space. Because the thing is, whenever you're looking at one thing to another thing, it's always in comparison into the canvas that we're looking at, right? So I can tell how tall, let's say, a tree is by what it's next to, right? So if I have a house next to the tree and the tree is only going up to the window, it's not a very big tree. But if I have the tree next to the house and it's like twice the size of the house, you assume it's a large tree. But really, the tree doesn't actually have to change size at all. It's just what's around it. So everything is always in comparison to everything else. Everything's relative. Okay. So another example here, if I want to make these things stand out, so you can see president, 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 president. But notice that because there's an extra space here, this stands out a little bit more. Okay, you automatically assume there's something different about this one. Even within words themselves, right? So we have like what we call tracking, which is the space between the letters. But by putting each letter right next to each other, we assume that this is a word. Then we put a space, and then this is a word, and this is space, right? So that white space can become really important. So eye stops basically is the number of stops that you look at with your eye. Typically, you want to lower the number, okay? We mentioned it before, but things that are intellectually connected should be visually connected. So just like I was saying before with the proximity, you want to put things that make sense to go together, all right? So if you look at this, if I were to look at this business card, right, I got to look up here, then I'll look over here. I'll probably look at this first because this is the biggest. I'm like, oh, and then I'll look up here because this is reading corner. And then I'll probably go there, and then I'll go there, and then I'll go there. So I look 5 times, right? This could be much cleaner. One of the biggest things that people make the mistake of doing is that they will they'll try to fill every corner. That's not necessary at all. In fact, you don't want to do that. You want to have space for things to breathe. So what I could do instead is that United States President and Heroes Washington, those obviously go together, right? A lot of times, you have your name, and then you have like what your position is. Then over here we have basically the contact stuff, right? So the address, the street address, and the well, it's not really state, but whatever, the district address, and then this, right? So this makes sense. This is much cleaner, simpler, by making it more truncated. Okay, visual hierarchy. So the idea here is that you will have some elements that stick out more than other elements. And then what will happen is that when a person looks at your composition, they'll look at one thing first, then they'll look at the next most important thing, then the next most important thing, and the next most important thing. There are things you can do to make people draw people to certain elements before other ones. So one is make it larger, right? So this text is larger. Most importantly, put an image. If you use an image, that will draw people in more than anything else, right? Make something bold, right? Add color. Okay, so if I were to look at this, right, first thing I want to look at is this. And this is basically what I want them to know first and foremost, right? When they go to this page, I know that probably the rest of this page deals with U.S. presidents, and of that, their party affiliations, okay? Then, the next thing I want to look at is either down here, where I get a general idea, because there's kind of color here, or I feel like I'm actually getting drawn up here first. This, right? I would look at these, oh, okay. And then I would look at the people individually. But I would start from the highest in the hierarchy and work my way down, okay? But typically you want to try and you want to show them what you're going to give them and then give them what you're describing. So contrast, basically shout and whisper items so that it creates more interest. If you only create a small amount of contrast, like you see this is a little bit bolder than these, but not a whole ton, right? This is a bit better, right? It's like a different font altogether. We made this one bolder and this one bolder, and these a little bit less, okay? And then if you make, now I took this one, made it black, right? So that sticks out a whole lot more, and then made this thicker, okay? Doing it this way, if you're gonna do the contrast, it's better to really punch it. Otherwise, it'll look more like a mistake, okay? Alignment. So the alignment, basically what you want to do with this is that just as we were talking about with proximity, that if you have one element next to another element, you automatically, it helps group those together. You assume association. Another thing you do is use alignment. So one of the things that people always do, and I did it too, is that they'll use center alignment. Never use center alignment. There's almost no reason to use that, okay? By doing a left or right alignment, it helps give this, which is a combined, like a one element, and then this is also another element. But by sharing, which actually this is a terrible example because this isn't even actually tight to this, but by sharing this right alignment, it helps give these two associations. It also helps draw your eye down. So you'll notice that, like, I have these different chunks here, but because these things are all left aligned, it helps you associate this element with this element, and then this element with this, and it draws you all the way down, okay? So some things you can do that will help with that as well, and this is very common. Let's say you have an image, and then you have text, right? A block of text. Now you can see this is right now left aligned. But we end up getting the rag over here, right? Which is like the torn edges. So there's not as much association. If instead I switch this to right alignment, there's a better association between these two, and it creates a cleaner edge. So it actually would behoove me to actually put this and right align it to this instead. Repetition, basically repeating elements such as white space, typeface, colors, blah, 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 just helps create unity and consistency. So if you remember, what we're always looking for is contrast, or variety and unity. Okay, so variety creates interest, right? Like if, if I make mashed potatoes and I throw some peanut M&Ms in there, like it's definitely going to be interesting, right? Some variety there. But that's a little too nuts, right? But if I take mashed potatoes, maybe put some gravy in there, and then maybe have some maybe some bacon or something in there, right? Those things, they can be more unified. It makes sense to go together. It's a little bit better, but there's still a little bit more interesting than just plain mashed potatoes. It's not that great. So usually I like to use food because I like food too much. But that's kind of a good way of looking at it, is that, if you have just bland, like just bread, it's not that good. But if you put like peanut butter and jelly in there, it's pretty good. But once you start throwing in, like, if it's peanut butter and jelly, and then you throw in some bacon, and then, like, some cheese, and lettuce, and then maybe, like, I don't know, some grass, right? It's got a lot of variety, but now it's, like, too far gone. So you usually want to try and, have some unity and some variety. So a good way of doing that is repetition. So, using the same fonts, using the same pattern of things that you're doing, such as like here. If you look at this as a good example, so everything is numbered in the same way. They all use this right alignment. It's consistently the same picture. If we were going page to page, I have this horizontal rule at the top and at the bottom, and then there's a page number. A lot of times magazines or other things, they'll have actually the name of the magazine or what the article is, or if it's a book, sometimes they'll have the name of the chapter down there. And that way you, like, when you go from page to page, that even though they're separate pieces of paper all together, it helps each page have association as well, okay? So composition basically is just all the rules above that just kind of illustrate your meaning and provide emphasis on your ideas. It's more or less kind of the page layout, right? So you're just trying to organize your information in an interesting way that is easy to digest, okay? So text. So if you were going to take a typography course, or if you were going to take a graphic design in a 4-year school, or web design, or anything kind of in that realm, they would make you take a typography course. You would take one class, one whole semester long, just about type. Okay, so typography is the design and the use of typefaces, right? So, the different fonts that you could choose from or make. But they would make you do that, because if you really think about it, most of the time when you're working in a layout, be it web design, graphic design, or any of those subcategories, you're pretty much, those are your two mediums, right? You're dealing with imagery and text, and that's pretty much it. So those are like the two main things, right? There's no audio. Those are basically what you have to work with. So typography is super duper important. Now, and this course does not have enough time to really kind of go into it. What I would generally say is that you will find there are two types of fonts. There's a bunch of subcategories of fonts, and if you take web design, I'll go over it a little bit more. Definitely if you take Digital Imaging 3, which I highly suggest if you're a graphic design or like something of that sort. Currently Newbie's teaching it, and he's awesome. So there's serif, which is basically serifs have serifs on them, which are those little nucks. So if you look at here, see how there's these feet here on this N, right? So that and these these things up here, those are serifs. I'm trying to see if any of the rest of these. No, none of the rest of those have it. But that's serif font. Sans serif basically means it doesn't have it at all. So they're usually typically super clean fonts. So serif font would be like Times New Roman. Sans serif font would be like Arial. Okay, those are basically the two, and most of the fonts will lie within those two categories. Now, besides those two, I'm not going to cover it. Anyways, so some text do's and don'ts. Don't use every font in one document. Generally speaking, what you want to do is this for your text. You have a heading font, which is basically like here. So you see how like there's this fanciful font? It's font that that's really interesting looking and draws the viewer in, but they would not be able to read it in like a full body text. Like it's too fancy. Like it would be hard to read, and it would stress your eyes to read them. So that usually you want one font that's like that, okay? Which typically they might call that like fantasy or what do they call it? I don't know. Those kind of fonts. And then the other one you'd want is your body font, which is more or less the font that you're going to use for large bodies of text, okay? So typically you only want 2 fonts. You could throw in a third one, like maybe you have like a set, like, you know, sometimes you see an article and they'll have like a quote that they make bigger than everything else. That might be a different font. But you don't want to use a whole ton of fonts, okay? Usually keep it very minimalist. Same thing with color. Usually color you want 2 to 3 colors. Same thing with fonts, 2 to 3 is what you want as well. All right. Watch this video because it's really fun and cool. But I'm not going to play it now because it'd be like watching the YouTube video inside of a YouTube video, and that'd be weird. Plus, I might get like demonetized or something. But it's really neat. So for your next assignment, what I want you to do is create a magazine advertisement. So you're going to make 2 variations of a magazine ad using your own graphics and text. Okay. So you can advertise whatever you want, but picture it basically being like you open up a Vogue magazine or House and Garden or whatever. I don't know what magazines are out there. And there's just, you know, they have ads for like perfume or what have you. You're just going to make a 1-page ad, but I want you to make 2 of them. Now, you can make 2 ads about the same product. So let's say you're going to sell baseballs, right? So you could do 2 ads that are both selling baseballs, but they need to be different. Like they can't be the same ad. Or you could do 2 totally different things, like one's a baseball and one's a football or perfume or whatever. Okay, but basically make 2 ads that would be appropriate for like a magazine. Okay, I'm gonna be grading you on this. You're gonna still have to fill out the project cover sheet. Here's a video tutorial. This is what we would be doing in class on how to make basically this ad here. And then just, you know, try to do the best you can with your stuff. I think that's it. So good luck, and if you run into any issues, just email me and I will try to do the best I can.